then what was scaling an AI company like this like? What were the easy parts? What were the hard parts?
We straight away recognized that the US market is the one that you need to win. And we actually invited some of the key investors. At the time, they were mostly angel investors, to say, look, we want to do this in the US, and we need to, because it's essentially a race for data. If there were to be a startup that solves this problem, it can solve a global problem that pretty much every human on the planet faces. And that is an ability to verify that they are who they claim to be online in a digital way.
Husayn, yes, I get to catch up with you, my old friend, on air on the Super Data Science podcast. This is so exciting. I've been looking forward to this day for a long time. How you doing, Husayn? Where in the world are you calling in from?
I am very well. I'm in Kentish Town, North London, and really, really pleased to be on.
Nice, yeah. The audience is in for a treat today for sure, because yeah, you're a tremendous person. You exude this calmness that I come away from every experience with you feeling like everything in life is great and under control. And so I hope that the audience comes away feeling feeling the same way from this episode and inspired by the things that they can do by scaling up AI applications, even a fraction of the scale that you have. So we've known each other for a very long time. I was at Oxford studying from 2007 to 2012, and I started getting involved with the entrepreneurship organization of the university called Oxford Entrepreneurs in 2008, and I served in leadership roles there up until I left the university in 2012, and I did things like I was a VP of the organization, and so doing things like interviewing the president. So the president was a pretty cool job that people could have at OE, that we'd actually pay you a salary. Typically, people would take a year off, either take a year, interrupt their studies for a year, or take a year between their studies and, say, launching a business or getting involved in some other kind of commercial opportunity. And so in 2008, you started getting involved with Oxford Entrepreneurs as well on the committee. And in 2011, I interviewed you for the president job, and you were a shoo-in. You were president for that year until 2012. And I remember not only were you an amazing leader of the organization, but there was a specific day we were in the business school in Oxford and in the front hall, and you were telling me about this idea you had. You'd been applying for different job opportunities, and you couldn't believe how much duplication of effort there was. For every job that you applied to, you had to create a new profile. You had to answer new questions. You had to provide the same verification documents over and over again. And so you said to me, Jon, I think that there's an opportunity here. And then many years and $200 million in capital raised from the likes of TPG, Salesforce, and Microsoft. You were the CEO and co-founder of this massive tech startup, Onfido, that started from that idea. So,
former CEO, correct?
Yes, you were, and yeah. So it's so amazing, to have you on, and you can tell us about that journey from that kernel of an idea to, I remember things like you telling me how, the big banks, investment banks that were like the kind of job that you thought might appeal to you. Everybody's working in spreadsheets, and you thought there's got to be like a better way to be working. There's got to be ways to be more efficient. There's got to be opportunities to automate and innovate in the world, and you wanted to be part of that. And so I don't know if you want to just kind of tell us about the beginning of this journey where, you were a student, then you became the president of this entrepreneurship organization, and you had this idea, this opportunity, and you saw the potential in software and automation. And yeah, so what happened? How did you have the courage to take those first steps?
It was so during the time at Oxford Entrepreneurs, I got to, along with sort of some friends, we got to see how the world is changing quite rapidly. And there are an increasing number of tools available that make it a lot easier to start a startup and try out new things. And so we got to see that firsthand. And as you can imagine, there's a bit of excitement that comes with this ability for you and a few friends with some laptops and internet access to build something that has a potential, very, very small likelihood, but has the potential. It is possible for it to, potentially touch everyone in the world or have a chance to
Mhm.
scale globally. So with all that excitement, then afterwards going and working at essentially investment banks, me and my two co-founders, it was a bit of a dampener in that, sitting behind spreadsheets or typically not using the latest software, even it was Windows 2000 or whatever it may have been. And so the first half with the Oxford Entrepreneurs introduced us to technology and what can happen and how the world is completely changing. And then the second half, being part of these larger corporate environments, it was a bit of an understanding around the culture, the norms and habits that guide, constructive innovation and teamwork and things of that nature. And we kind of came to the decision that we ought to do a startup ourselves. So I did like a 1 week internship. One of my co-founders did the whole summer internship. And our third co-founder, he actually spent 2 years at an investment bank before he joined full time. So it was wonderful and we learned a lot, but we knew that we wanted to set up a culture where people would very much enjoy coming to work and not lose that like passion and excitement that they don't need to spend 2 to 3 years working on Excel spreadsheets before they're given a chance to do something. They can
Right.
join, and from pretty early on, they have autonomy and sort of a path to really start making a contribution.
Cool. And then so the specific idea behind Onfido that the three of you co-founded, you, Eamon, and Rahul, um, I know from something I read online, actually not something that I knew about you personally from before, is that your family had some identity verification challenges when they moved back to England from Iran. So, how did that kind of identity verification challenge become part of the genesis behind the idea of Onfido? And why is this kind of identity verification challenge important?
It was so specifically when I turned 10, my parents moved from Iran. They came to the UK, and I just remember, even though I was quite young, they kind of struggled to open a bank account and rent in their own name. So growing up, at a young age, I realized how important identity verification is, essentially being able to prove that you are who you claim to be.
Mhm.
And that it's all underpinned for the most part, or it used to be before Onfido and sort of our approach, it used to be underpinned by credit bureaus. And then when I looked into the credit bureaus, I kind of saw that these are centralized databases of everyone's date of birth, name, and address. And that whole approach is about 150 years old. And
Right.
the two main issues are, part of it is that it excludes half the world's adult population who are underbanked or unbanked, or maybe have recently moved to a country and therefore don't have a credit footprint, such as in my situation. Or the other half of the world's population, such as us, where we do have a credit footprint. It is so easy for fraudsters to commit identity fraud and pretend to be you. So all that faff
Right.
and all those sort of unnecessary hoops to jump through for this illusion of security, and yet you're not even getting security because it's so easy for fraudsters to cheat it. And that was
Right.
clear for me, and what a fundamental problem we have here. And in parallel, I got quite fortunate in working with our technical co-founder in particular to see how machine learning offers a path forward for there to be a superior way to verify people or who they claim to be remotely.
Super cool. And so part of what allowed Onfido to disintermediate uh, to provide a technological solution that this 150-year-old credit footprint industry couldn't was AI, was data science. So you were able to use machine vision to try to predict whether a given government ID is real or is fake. And then subsequently, you can match the person's face to their ID. And so, as you say, this goes beyond, just looking at somebody's address, which could easily be falsified. So, was that like, how did that come about? How did you realize that there was this potential AI-driven solution?
So we had our technical co-founder. It just so happens that his university thesis was using machine learning to spot wildlife in 25,000 photos of the jungle. And he was explaining it to me, and he explained how these models can be trained to recognize patterns, and then when you feed it more data, it's at first human assisted machine learning, and then can do it at scale more effectively, and so on. So then that's when I started to say, if there were to be a government ID, can you see these patterns? Because this is structured data. And he said, yeah, This is like a very obvious thing. I said, if it's so obvious, then no one's doing it. It really needs, if there were to be a startup that solves this problem, it can solve a global problem that pretty much every human on the planet faces. And that is an ability to verify that they are who they claim to be online in a digital way. And then I went into, and I continuously have done, I've got a habit of going on about how much of a broken system we have as far as identity is broken and getting worse. And how the credit bureaus are fundamentally predicated and historically have been around exclusion of people. And whereas this new age requires us to rethink it and develop a way to make it easy for more people to prove that they are who they claim to be, and at a much lower cost and a much greater security. And that whole process in sort of going to union in 2008, it's just off the back of the financial crash.
Mm-hmm.
And so throughout that whole period, all these models were being rethought as well. And that kind of was the early stages of thinking about new fintech and new ways of doing finance. And a big barrier to a new approach to finance beyond sort of traditional incumbent mainstream banks and others has always been this identity and compliance component. So the need was always there. It was always broken, at least in our minds, but it was becoming even more painful. And yet, it was great to see how advances in machine learning were able to. It's not necessarily advances in machine learning; it's just the affordability of like servers and being able to run models, and all this. To my earlier points around the tools to actually get a system going became so much more accessible and affordable that we could start playing with prototypes.
Eliminating unnecessary distractions is one of the central principles of my lifestyle. As such, I only subscribe to a handful of email newsletters, those that provide a massive signal-to-noise ratio. One of the very few that meet my strict criterion is the Data Science Insider. If you weren't aware of it already, the Data Science Insider is a 100% free newsletter that the Super Data Science team creates and sends out every Friday. We pore over all of the news and identify the most important breakthroughs in the fields of data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. The top 5, simply 5 news items. The top 5 items are handpicked, the items that we're confident will be most relevant to your personal and professional growth. Each of the 5 articles is summarized into a standardized, easy-to-read format and then packed gently into a single email. This means that you don't have to go and read the whole article. You can read our summary and be up to speed on the latest and greatest data innovations in no time at all. That said, if any items do particularly tickle your fancy, then you can click through and read the full article. This is what I do. I skim the Data Science Insider newsletter every week. Those items that are relevant to me, I read the summary in full. And if that signals to me that I should be digging into the full original piece, for example to pore over figures, equations, code, or experimental methodology, I click through and dig deep. So, if you'd like to get the best signal-to-noise ratio out there in data science, machine learning, and AI news, subscribe to the Data Science Insider, which is completely free, no strings attached, at superdatascience.com/DSI. That's superdatascience.com/DSI. And now, let's return to our amazing episode. Yeah, it was around the time that you guys founded Onfido, it was in 2012 that we had the first deep learning model that became like a worldwide sensation. So we had this AlexNet architecture um, that was this machine vision algorithm that could recognize images and classify them correctly to a much higher degree of accuracy than any other algorithm on the planet. And as you say, the big thing that allowed that to be possible was that compute had become cheap enough, storage had become cheap enough, and the tooling had become available to start to allow us to relatively easily make use of the cloud compute that we need to be able to train an algorithm like yours to distinguish whether a government ID is real or fake. And yeah, super cool. Amazing that it happened so organically. I mean, how fortuitous to have like at that time where because of the financial crisis, people are looking for new kinds of solutions to old problems. Um, Machine learning models have just become accessible enough and powerful enough to be doing the kinds of things that you and your co-founders had dreamt up, and that you had that expertise that you have this this innate pragmatism and commercial acumen that makes you an outstanding CEO. And then you also had someone like Rahul who had this machine vision background. And so together, yeah, you were able to get Onfido off the ground. So what was that like in the beginning? So what was the story around developing the tech versus maybe looking for seed funding from VCs? How did the initial seed stages play out for you?
And so, yeah, there was my third co-founder, Eamon, who also came specifically on the operations and the scaling side. He helped a lot. So the initial phases were pretty much as soon as I graduated, dropping out was not an option, and I never even thought about it. I've got like Middle Eastern dad; it just doesn't come into the vocabulary. So graduated, started working on the prototype. My technical co-founder, Rahul, at the time, he had his job and he had the mortgage. So I had an agreement with him. We get to our first client. You work evenings and weekends. Just help me on the prototype. Let me sign a few clients. When we get funding, when we get paying customers, I need you to commit that you're going to resign and jump on full time at a much reduced salary. But this is at least, these are the proof points you'll need. And that we kind of achieved that within a year. And that was perfect because when that happened after that first year, our third co-founder, he just finished his exams. And so he was able to join full time. It was like about a 1 year period where the other two part-time had to sort of help evenings and weekends. And there was me full time. And then after that first year, the two of them came. And then there were three of us. There were challenges, you look 18, 19. I was told that I look younger than my age at the time. So trying to go and sell a security product to banks and others when you look 15 and yet you're talking about machine learning, which is wasn't in the discourse or vocabulary at the time, and you essentially go to like someone at the bank and you tell them, by the way, when people come in and like sign up an account, they can do it from home with the smartphone, and they'd show their ID and they'd show their face. It was too wacky for them. It wouldn't have worked. So we had to go find people who were of a similar mindset, and that ended up being exactly startups like us. A lot of, again, good timing. We were lucky that it was a rise of the trust marketplaces. So if you want a nanny, tutor, doctor, cleaner come into your house, that whole on-demand wave, then there was
an Uber driver.
Precisely. Then you had the sharing economy, it was called at the time, trust marketplace, where you're sharing a car with someone like BlaBlaCar or sharing a home with someone like couch surfing. Then we started to see in 2013, 14, the rise of like the fintechs. So we were lucky in that right timing for the right customer cohorts at the right stage. And then when we started to sell into fintech and financial services, at that point, the scale and the volumes became so high that our models were consistently able to prove scientifically that we are able to catch fakes better than the human eye can. And so at that point, it started to become, it was early stages, but eventually became exponential. And that sort of really matched very well the growth of the fintechs. And in many ways, it would have been hard to envisage trust marketplace or the fintech ecosystem being as big as it is, were it not for tools such as Onfido and similar ones.
For sure. Super cool. And then so that kind of gets us through the seed stage and finding those initial customers. Then what was scaling an AI company like this like? What were the easy parts? What were the hard parts? Um, you went from being based in London and having your team entirely there, to then making the decision to have a large part of the company in the Bay Area. And so, yeah, these kinds of decisions. Yeah, like I said,
Yeah.
what were the easy parts? What were the hard parts? How did you scale this AI company from your first few customers to raising $200 million?
So this is just about 2015 where we had a basic product. It's only fair to say call it basic. And then, but comparatively, they weren't, we were still strong and better than alternatives. But compared to where we are today, it's fair to say it's quite of a basic version. We straight away recognized that the US market is the one that you need to win. And we actually invited some of the key investors. At the time, they were mostly angel investors, to say, look, we want to do this in the US, and we need to, because it's essentially a race for data. And we need to be able to cover more and more IDs globally to build the best models, because it's not good enough just doing French IDs well and British IDs well. You need to be able to do the Maltese or the Indonesian or the Vietnamese and so on and so forth. So we said we want the ability to sign clients that are global. And most of these global companies are based in the US, and they don't want to buy from a UK company. They want to buy from a US company. And there was pushback. We were kind of told, look, the ballpark number is you have to get to 20 million in revenues before you should consider the US. At the time, our revenues was close. This is 2015. It was closer to like £20,000. So there's a little bit of a gap. But as it happens, most of my family are based in California. And so we kind of launched in the US without telling the investors at the time. But it was a slow start. So 2015 was the first year we tried to launch in the US. I had the first team of about 3 people. And then 2016, 2017, 2018, it was just a very, very difficult path to coming out as a UK startup, trying to go through the same issue of like selling a security-based product to US institutions. So it took a good 3-4 years, and it was 2018 when we actually broke into the US market, and we started to become respected as a scale up and started to win some of these very large brands, as well as ultimately the banks. But it took a long time. It took much longer cracking the US than it did even setting up the UK. But it was never an option. Like, we made it clear to everyone, like, basically, if we were told win the US and lose the rest of the world, or vice versa, without blinking twice, we'd say win the US. Like, not winning the US was never really an option.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, incredible, incredible journey. Great to hear from you, kind of from where you and I left off. And I guess actually that was the last time I think we've seen each other in person was 2012. So now 10 years ago. We've caught up a couple times otherwise since, but in person, I think it's been 10 years. We'll have to fix that soon. But amazing to hear from kind of where I left you off, your journey to growing this massive company. But you're not the CEO anymore. So you have now gone off. Maybe you enjoyed some gardening or something for a while. I don't know how much you could do that. You probably can't sit still.
Look, it's conceptually, it sounds good. I have not yet done it. No, but when it came to pretty much the 10-year mark, we brought in a new CEO, and the plan is essentially to run an IPO and run towards an IPO. And I took a break, and then in the summer started a new company. So we're probably 8 months into the new venture. But previously, you'd also asked me about the kind of this scale up journey in your last question of what that was like. It was, for me, fundamentally, value creation comes down to the team, and what set us apart from everyone else, because it was relatively competitive at the time, was fundamentally the team. And so our sort of other co-founder, Eamon, he did a lot of heavy lifting on the operations side, but together we focused a lot on the team and read about what makes a great culture. We were involved in interviewing every single person who joined, and constantly recognize that as the most important thing, essentially who you're hiring, and having a really, really good process for that, starting with what problem is it that you're looking to solve and what kind of profile do you need, and then drawing in advisors or experts, or the best is usually other founders who've gone through it to help with that. Then once they're on board, how can you develop them? How can you help them do their life's best work and enjoy it more than any other career or job they've done in the past, and contribute more than they ever have? And how do you do that? And ensuring that the culture is strong, the norms and habits, and what makes it ultimately for people to want the company to achieve its mission. Beyond every single person is a shareholder or share option holder, and then ultimately a shareholder. What are all the things that are possibly doable that we can do to make sure this is not just an incredible team, but the best culture that we can get to? And it was a really good decision to do it that way. And that's because A, we enjoyed working there ourselves because of that. But B, it meant that we were able to attract like some of the best talent from across the world that ultimately helped us build the best products.
Awesome. Yeah. So value creation comes down to the right team. And yeah. And so there's two big pieces to that you're outlining. The first piece is getting the right hires. And then the second piece is having the right culture when they're on the job, making sure that everyone can be making the big impact that they want to be making, just like you did when you started off creating a startup from the very beginning. Super cool, Husayn. So this company that you're working on now, I understand it's in the creator economy sector. You're still in stealth, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're up to. Get us excited.
So I can tell you about the problems in that I've kind of, as you and as almost all of your listeners, we have an appreciation for alternative media, podcasts, YouTube, and everything else. So I've been a kind of a consumer of that content as anyone else has been. Back in 2007, just before I started university, I did a 30-part series for my high school and college around helping people get into university and like sort of pass exams. So recognizing the power of YouTube early on and being a fan since. But then when 2015, 2016, 2017 were pretty key for me. And then I kind of, at that time, I had this perspective that machine learning, AI, like it's great. The world's becoming a better place. It's all going to be rosy from now on, just to exaggerate. And then a series of things happened that were like a blind spot to be like, if I'm looking back, there were blind spots. A big part of that was elections across the world and sort of characters coming in that you would have never thought would have come in. And then recognizing, because of this deeper understanding of the power of data and machine learning and so on, recognizing that everyone celebrates the social media platforms, but there are certainly downsides. And not only are these downsides bad, but if you just extrapolate of where it's headed, we're headed into a pretty dark place. So the problem for me ultimately was one of the media and how it has problems and issues that need to be resolved. In parallel, I had my own view and thesis around consumption of media can be thought of in two ways. The way I look at it is like the more view count world, and then there's more what I call like repeatable world. View count world is epitomized by TikTok, and behind that Instagram, behind that Facebook, typically, where you want to go to that content. It's typically humor or entertainment. We all do it, and it's good and it has its place. But it's broadly speaking like distraction and switching off. Whereas the other side of the spectrum, we look at repeatable world content, meaning exactly like your podcast, where you may have relatively fewer viewers or listeners, still often tens, if not hundreds of thousands, but who come back week after week, often for many years. And those categories is typically more guru, learning, hobbies, and so on. And that they are somewhat underserved. And that these algorithms are heavily, disproportionately geared towards view count world and pushing up viral content, especially helping new viewers come as a result of their algorithms. But those same algorithms are disproportionately adversely affecting the repeatable world content. And then the repeatable world content, usually promotion and getting new viewers or listeners comes as a result of true fans telling their friends and peers, or other similar content creators sharing what you're doing. So what we're doing is essentially helping address that, bringing a more effective monetization and distribution approach to video content creators in particular in the repeatable world, and offering them the tech infrastructure to be able to do that.
Nice. Well, you're preaching to the choir right here, Husayn.
right in our wheelhouse. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is music to my ears, because I definitely, I experienced this where, we have this podcast, most listened to podcast in the data science industry. And so that's great. But I think to myself, well, how could we be getting more exposure? And it doesn't, we do get a little bit more exposure through YouTube algorithms. And I think a lot of new exposure comes when people Google data science podcast, we come up first. And so then they're likely to consider us. But we don't benefit in the same way that viral content does. So because we're in that second camp you described, the repeat content camp, where it's amazing, we do have listeners like you, listener, listening right now, who some of you have been around for many years and you listen to every episode. And so it means that every episode, it's really consistent in terms of the number of listeners. So you have to look like month over month or quarter over quarter to see changes in listenership. Whereas with the algorithms and viral content, so like, stuff that a YouTube algorithm or TikTok algorithm favors, you end up having these singular pieces of content that do incredible. And yeah, we're just not really, we're not making content like that. We're not making like viral content. We're not trying to be like clickbaity. We're just trying to give you a consistent, 2 shows a week. And on my YouTube channel, my personal YouTube channel, 1 video tutorial a week, every single week. And we hope that people stay committed and stay on. And so like you're saying, word of mouth can be a big thing. People on social media saying, I just listened to this amazing episode of the Super Data Science podcast. I learned this incredible thing, and I've been listening to the show for years. I highly recommend it. I think that's one of the primary drivers of how we grow, is this word of mouth, as you say. So I understand the problem you're describing very intimately. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you're up to and how it resolves this. Can you give us a little taste, or should we should just save it until launch time?
Taste so we're just under 20 people. The majority are engineers, coders, programmers working away on our prototype. We are in beta with about.
I love that
creators.
You've been doing this for less than a year, and you already have 20 people, mostly developers, working on it. Yeah, you couldn't stand gardening. You needed to do something.
That's what I said. The gardening just sounds so good. But I do. There is a concept of like a founder problem fit, and spending 10 years on this on solving like the identity problem. I know it has to be something that drives you. That's over and above what's normal. So you, in an unhealthy way, you have to become a little bit obsessed about solving it. And the problem was so bizarre, like so terrible, this identity, how it's broken and needs to be fixed. And that was like a drive to work and make it happen. That same level of energy and excitement holds for this problem that we as a team are working on. And I think that's really, really important. So when I it was quite clear to me that this is a problem that needs to be solved. And I've just been working on figuring out how, as opposed to thinking about what industry should come next. It was kind of natural for me after a break that whatever it is ends up being, it would be towards addressing this problem, because I see it as personally as a very fundamental issue. The way that the social media platforms could have an adverse impact on the world.
So what was your break, like a 3-day weekend?
Well, this is a thing, actually. The reason why I was able to go for like 10 years pretty well, and I'm sure this gig I'm setting aside like 20 years, is because you got to pace it that this is not a sprint. It really is a marathon.
Right.
So you'd be
Right.
surprised. I actually do a relatively normal 5 days a week, kind of 8 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. It's not like crazy that you might get. It's far worse in the city and sort of financial institutions. And I spend half a day on one of the weekends, and that's pretty much it. And that sustains for the whole year. I take about 2 weeks off. But I do it because I genuinely don't necessarily see it as work. I absolutely love what it is that I do, especially because I work with like incredible people, and that all helps. That all really, really helps.
Cool. It's nice to hear that you have that kind of balance. I've got to find a way to get more balance. And I could see how by not burning the candle at both ends in particular days or particular weeks, over the long run, you're more focused and more productive anyway. Um, and so, yeah, I've got to get some more of that balance in my life, Hussein. So now that you have this second startup running, do you have like a particular process for deciding on what startup opportunity to go with, or both of these opportunities, Onfido with credit and identity, and then now with your stealth startup and the creator economy? Um, were you just like intuitively, this is the biggest problem that I could be tackling right now? Or do you have a kind of like an exhaustive process that you go through before you go headfirst into the opportunity?
So it doesn't, as far as biggest problem, it doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest problem, but it has to be what I see as the most important. And it just
Right.
happens to be fortunate that identity was a global problem, and this sort of video content consumption is a global sort of size as well. And it helps when you're dealing with a global or something that has a potential to be large on a number of fronts. The first thing is when you hire people, you can say, look, we're working on a project or a mission that can be global, therefore it's like super impactful, and therefore you'd get a real kick out of building something that can be big. That's part of it. The second part of it is you're able to get more investments to be able to run fast and sort of win in essence. So there are those sides to it, but I do have a very strong appreciation for quality. I know that in the Bay Area, there's this obsession with like release and iterate or run fast, break things, whatever. That's not the way I've seen it nor see it, because in this day and age, the consumer pretty much gives you one shot. You got one shot to impress, and if you don't do that, they don't care that you're going to iterate. Like you really need to do a good job. So I have the reason why we're kind of taking our time and doing it organically, despite like this being a fast-paced world, is because for me, if it's slow, steady, and done properly, that's worth a ton more than running fast. And like the story with Fast from a month ago and other stories. Really, I'm sure hardworking team and everything, but just they're not getting the timing and the pacing right. And sometimes it's undue influence from investors in particular. And ultimately, like the founder is a decision maker. They should be setting the pace, and they should work to align everything else around that, not have, more investors wanting to invest or different components, more team members wanting to join or whatever it may be, setting the pace. Like the pace should be, you should be in the driving seat, not being driven by the need for speed as such.
That's that cool confidence that you exude that I love so much. That's it. And that's it in spades right there, where you're like, yeah, we got to get this product right. We're going to be disciplined about working on it consistently, getting it to a point where we can grow it organically, and we're not going to bow to pressure from the outside to rush this thing and risk not impressing our consumers on that one first shot that we get. I love that, Husayn.
I do see it in a very binary way. If there's just one other thing when I'm speaking with and learning from other founders, it's for me, it's very, very clear cut. Your pre-product market fit stage, your product market fit stage, and then your scale up stage. And it's just each one is a very clear binary progression to the next. Where you're now getting more pre-product market fit stage companies but investing and growing as like scale ups. And you have 300-400 people, but you don't even have product market fit. Like that doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help you necessarily get there faster. If anything, it's going to slow you down.
Yep.
But this wasn't really an option 10 years ago, right? 10 years ago, you couldn't do this. Like you would not get investment unless you had strong product market fit. Like it was in some ways 10 years ago, it was much harder to get investment, but the discipline that led to startups and scale ups coming out meant they were stronger, which is a change in the last 10 years.
Yeah, there's just so much money flowing now into with the in this low interest rate world that we're in. Though that might change in 2022. The low interest rate world that we've been in for over a decade until now means that everybody's looking for yield. And so you have big hedge funds, big institutional managers that are saying, "Oh, look over there. These VC firms are getting yield above zero. So let's put a bunch of money over there." And so I was reading a stat. I can't remember the number, but it was something like 600 billion. Don't quote me on this, listener, but something like $600 billion flowed into machine learning tech startups in 2021, and that was double the amount in 2020. So the double, you can quote me on. The exact number, don't quote me on. But so when there's that much money flowing in, if you're a VC and you've got this giant pool of money that you're expecting to deploy over a certain time span, you've got to put it somewhere. And so you end up having the situation that you're describing where pre-product market fit companies are getting scale-up level investment. And it could lead to a rocky few years. Maybe they'll get lucky, but maybe they won't. Super cool to get that perspective, Husayn. So, all right, so now we have some idea of how you think about the opportunities that you tackle. We've heard a lot about your founding team with Onfido, so how Eamon was key for operations and Rahul was key for technology. So do you have a process or rules of thumb for choosing your co-founding team?
I'd say a co-founder, when I speak with other like founders or co-founders thinking through this process, it ought to be seen as, again, like it's very much a binary thing. If someone's a co-founder versus a very senior employee or like an incredible team member employee. Whereas the reason why it's binary is like a co-founder is all in by every definition, meaning there is a trade-off to be had. They will have shorter weekends. They will have fewer holidays. They will lose sleep if the money is going to run out, or if there's like some sort of fire in some part of the organization. They will have to lead by example, and the rest of it. And they have to be able to be to learn and go through a very quick learning process quite rapidly. So with all that said, that whole process of whether someone becomes a co-founder or not should be thought about very, very carefully. Because I do understand that this emphasis around I don't necessarily have a lot of experience myself. Let me bring someone in. They're only going to join if they get the co-founder title. So there's this urge, or other titles like a senior title. There's this urge to promising stuff and then having it work, but it is such a consequential decision that it should be thought of really, really carefully. Having said that, for someone who's doing it the first time, having just gone through that for 10 years, I would not have been able to do it without my co-founders. And you really need to be very well aware of your skill set and crucially what you're not good at, and make sure you have complementary one or two or three co-founders, and make sure you're all super complementary and very different to each other, so that you collectively combine make it as a kind of the full package. So with all that said, if you don't have the full package and if you're a first timer or like new, I would recommend a co-founding team. Just like think about it really, really carefully. And unless you have like that perfect match, don't rush into any sort of co-founder relationship unless you're absolutely sure. because they should not be thought of as like, this is my best senior team member, let me make them a co-founder, because it's just not going to be like that.
Awesome. Great advice. All right. So, Husayn, you've already had this tremendous success scaling up an AI startup, and now you're onto your second startup. You are generally a wise and worldly person, so I think that this question will be an interesting one for you to answer. So, in the past decades, and presumably for the decades to come, there's been ever cheaper data storage, ever cheaper compute, ever more abundant sensors. There's been unprecedented interconnectivity between people, and more people on the planet connected to each other every year. And lots of modeling innovations, data modeling innovations, as well as DevOps, cloud innovations, accessibility to scaling up machine learning models and technology platforms in general. So every year, the pace at which technology changes increases. So given this, and given that you're still relatively early on in your entrepreneurial career, what excites you about the future?
There is if anything, it is now that potential to start something and for it to go global exists. Just that same feeling that me and the other sort of my two co-founders had in 2008 now holds, and in fact holds more than it ever has in history. Now there's just a lot more investments or capital available to be invested in developing things. And whereas 10, 15 years ago, if it would have taken 10 years for a company to be global, now you increasingly have that being a shorter time scale. 3 years, 5 years, something can go from zero to essentially having an impact globally in a very, very quick and short period of time. So that is that your question of what is exciting, that in itself is very exciting. In parallel, there can be negatives with that. Naturally, if you don't have product market fit, then scaling is kind of doesn't necessarily get you product market fit. So there's that point from earlier. But crucially, as and when there are technologies that are deployed quickly and have a global reach in a very short amount of time, we all know how regulators can be slow in catching up. It's just the way it works. It's they need to do a much better job of getting much closer to understanding technology. I'm sure and hopeful that you increasingly have regulators listening in on your podcast so that they're up to speed with the power of this technology and technologies like this, so that they understand there are so many upsides and benefits, but there are downsides, and that it's our sort of job as a collective, both as whether it's on the academic side, practitioners, policymakers, or often a bit of all of that, to collectively work to put in guides, policies, rules, regulation, so that we make sure we maximize just like the good stuff and control the stuff that can adversely affect you. Because when you get to a state where in 5 or 10 years, we don't put a control on some of the risks on the adverse things, you can have a backlash. There's been technological backlashes in the past, which has celebrated advances in medicine, diagnoses. We've just been talking about identity and what I've been sharing and all the very many good things that can come as a result. But not be sort of just to remain mindful of the downsides and to work to minimize those.
Nice. Well said and wise, as I expected. All right, Husayn, this has been a tremendous journey getting to hear about your journey from the conception of Onfido to being a massive global successful company, and then now onwards to your next big thing. So starting to wrap up the episode, do you have a book recommendation for us?
So I'm immersing myself with media and everything media related. So I just finished Hate Inc. It's Matt Taibbi. It just talks a bit about specifically news. It just it seems like it does a quite fair job, like criticizing CNN and Fox and just talking through the issues. there's a political layer to it, but it's a bit deeper than that, talking about how and why we as sort of, whether you look at the US or in the UK, 10 years ago, we kind of saw each other all as kind of the same. And now there's increasing like this tribalism problem. This is a very good book that helps go towards explaining some of the reasons why.
Cool. That's a great recommendation and very on theme for topics we've been covering in this episode. I'm sure listeners will reach for that book now. So as I mentioned a number of times on the show, I have enormous respect for you. Always come away from conversations with you feeling more focused and refreshed than before we started talking. And I also feel like you have tons of wisdom to impart all the time. So how can listeners follow you after this podcast? How can they continue to stay up to date on your latest thoughts?
That's kind of you to say. So I'm on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is at Husayn Kassai.
Nice. We will include that in the show notes for sure. Thank you, Husayn, for taking time out of what is no doubt your busy life as you get going on this next stealth startup. We can't wait for that to be launched and hear more about it. Thank you so much for being on the program, and maybe we can catch up on the show again in a few years to hear about how scaling up that startup is coming along.
Absolutely. It's great to have been on.
Loved catching up with Husayn on air today. I hope you feel as grounded and inspired from hearing from him as I do whenever I talk to him. In today's episode, Husayn filled us in on how he conceived of Onfido as a firm to disrupt the 150-year-old credit footprint industry, how the value creation when scaling a company comes from hiring and retaining a great team, how the US market is often the key to winning the data race if you are developing a data-hungry AI platform, how he weighs the most important problem to solve is more important than the biggest problem to solve when deciding on a startup opportunity, how it's key to develop your AI product at a slow and steady pace in order to find product market fit before accepting tons of venture capital for scaling up, and how a co-founder may be critical for you to shore up your own skill set gaps, but you shouldn't rush into bringing just anyone on as a co-founder, as it's a big decision reserved only for those who are willing to lose a lot of sleep. As always, you can get all the show notes, including the transcript for this episode, the video recording, any materials mentioned on the show, the URLs for Husayn's Twitter profile, as well as my own social media profiles at superdatascience.com/577. That's superdatascience.com/577. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd greatly appreciate it if you left a review on your favorite podcasting app or on the Super Data Science YouTube channel. I also encourage you to let me know your thoughts on the episode directly by adding me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and then tagging me in a post about it. Your feedback is invaluable for helping us shape future episodes of the show. Thanks to my colleagues at Nebula for supporting me while I create content like this Super Data Science episode for you. And thanks, of course, to Yvonne and Siebert, Mario Pombo, Serge Massis, Sylvia Ogveng, and Kirill Eremenko on the Super Data Science team for managing, editing, researching, summarizing, and producing another inspiring episode for us today. Keep on rocking it out there, folks, and I'm looking forward to enjoying another round of the Super Data Science podcast with you very soon.